I entered a local game jam and made a game about playing as Poseidon, a vengeful sea god. In the game, you play as a storm and try to sink as many ships as possible using your lightning bolts. Later, you unlock new attacks, like the Maelstrom, a whirlpool that sucks ships into the depths. You can also unleash the Kraken, which is my personal favorite. Once it's released, it goes from ship to ship, mercilessly pulling each one into the sea. Or you can choose to lure sailors to their death with the Siren. Finally, in the endgame, you can truly show nature's wrath with the powerful Tidal Wave. You can play the game now on itch.io. It's called Poseidon's Mercy, and while nowhere close to perfect, the game ended up winning the most enjoyable and best style categories in the Game Jam. We'll choose to bask in victory and ignore that there were only 5 entries. The Game Jam was the annual KW month-long Game Jam, or Mologa, and took place during the month of March. Even though it was technically a month long, it seemed irresponsible to me to spend a whole month on a Game Jam project, so I only really worked on my game for the final week. My main game project is Get in the Hole, which you should wishlist now on Steam. It's a roguelike about pushing stuff into a hole, and I released the demo a few weeks ago. I was honestly feeling pretty burnt out on it. I figured a game jam would be a great way to take a little break and do something different for a while. The theme was, something is missing. After thinking it over, I kept coming back to the idea of lost treasure. This led me to thinking about a pirate-ish theme, and then I realized that not only can treasure be lost, but ships can be lost as well. I still wasn't quite sure what to do, but then a few other pieces fell into place to give me a solid direction. First, it so happened that I had recently been following Binbun on itch.io, where he had been releasing a ton of cool VFX packs for Godot. Looking at his smoke pack, I wondered if I could modify some of the assets to resemble a storm. Storms and missing ships would go together well. There had also been a recent boom of nodebuster-like incremental games. The one I was most familiar with was a game about feeding a black hole, but now there are tons of them. The general idea of these games is that you hover over various things on the screen to destroy them and make a number go up. I was kind of interested in trying out the genre, and a game jam seemed like the perfect place to do so. Putting these two together, the direction became clear. What if you played as a storm and tried to destroy as many ships as possible? For every destroyed ship, you would gain treasure and souls, which could be used in the incremental tech tree part of the game. With the idea complete, I had to start somewhere. I got a Binbun water shader and threw it on a quad. Then, I spent a bunch of time heavily modifying some of the smoke shaders to create a storm. Everything hinged on this looking pretty decent, and I was ultimately satisfied with the result. I made the storm track the cursor, and the fantasy of controlling a storm had come to life. Next, we needed something to destroy, so I got a ship model from K-Kit and made it sail around the sea. The storm would periodically check for ships and damage any that were underneath. I added a glowing circle to indicate the area that would be affected by the storm. But how exactly do storms damage ships? A nice visual way to do it would be with lightning, so I grabbed a Binbun projectile VFX pack, fashioned a crude lightning bolt, and animated it. With a sound effect added, it was pretty satisfying. Even with the basic mechanic done, there was still an incredible amount of work left to do. But don't worry, I had my priorities straight. Instead of working on the actual game, I created some cool cover art in Canva. The tentacles in the art looked cool, but I quickly realized I had just signed myself up to make a Kraken, which sounded kinda hard. Whoops. But that was a problem for future me. I decided to call the game Poseidon's Mercy because I'd recently heard the song Ruthlessness from Epic the Musical, where Poseidon famously sings, "Ruthlessness is mercy upon ourselves." I don't really know what that means, but basically mercy is actually destroying ships, I think. My ADHD still wasn't satisfied, so I took a second detour. While looking for a sound effect for a hypothetical siren, I found this cool sample of some singing. It didn't seem to actually make sense for the game, but it inspired me. So I threw it into Logic Pro and started creating some theme music. I found some cool Greek instrument samples built into Logic Pro, put them together with the siren singing, and ended up with kind of a banger if I do say so myself. ADHD finally satisfied, I got back to the game. I now had ideas for several more attacks. The first was the Maelstrom, or Whirlpool. I started with Binbun's portal VFX and then used Godot's stencil buffer to punch a hole in the water and make it look like a whirlpool. If you're interested in using the stencil buffer for holes like this, check out this video. Whenever ships get close, they get sucked toward the center, and their colliders change to allow them to fall into the hole. Next, I added the siren. It consisted of a rock, some small people sitting on it, and a magic ring to show the area of effect. Whenever a ship gets too close, it's redirected toward the rock and then sinks. To sell that the sirens are singing, I made a kind of psychedelic music note with Canva clip art and created a particle emitter to make them gently float upward and disappear. The next attack was the Kraken. I knew I had to add this one because it was on the cover art, and because if I could pull it off, it would be super cool. But to be honest, I really wasn't sure if I could pull it off without it just looking dumb. I found an animated tentacle by Quaternius in Poly.pizza. It had this one animation that I could imagine as a grab. So in Godot, I slowed down the animation and figured out that if the animation ended at the appropriate time, it would look just like the tentacles wrapped around something, like a ship. I spent a ton of time iterating on exact timing and finally achieved a cool effect where the tentacles lunge out of the water, grab a ship, and pull it down. With a sound effect, I was really happy with it. Once the Kraken was unleashed, I wanted it to keep going on its own. So I added a squid model to the game that would fly from ship to ship, destroying them one by one. Quite terrifying and cool. With the Kraken done, I was quite relieved. I had spent most of my week so far just creating the basic attacks of the game. I really needed to get to the actual game loop. But first, I had to create one final attack, the tidal wave. The appearance of the wave is done with a vertex shader on the water, physically moving the geometry to create a large wave. Then, I put a capsule collider underneath the wave that actually interacts with the ships and pushes them out of the way. I was pretty happy with the effect. Even though I now had 4 attacks, I wasn't really sure how the player would control them. It's probably not the best approach, but I decided to have the player select their attack with a keyboard button, and then activate it with a mouse click. I added some icons at the side of the screen to show which attack was currently selected. I decided that ships would drop both treasure and souls, and while the treasure would be used for the eventual upgrades, the souls would be used as the cost for the attacks. With that out of the way, I tidied up the general game loop, and the way the game would transition back and forth between gameplay and the still completely unimplemented tech tree. As a node buster like, each round of the game would last for just a few seconds, and then spit you back into the tech tree. I also took this time to implement a menu with basic quality of life options for sound and graphics. Finally, it was time to actually implement the tech tree. By this point, I had very little time left, so I took a fairly minimalist approach and just created a giant linear list of upgrades. Each upgrade would just be a button with a tooltip. It was the last day, and while the game worked, there were basically no upgrades implemented, and the game hadn't been balanced at all. So I just threw every upgrade I could think of into the game, and added a few different ship sizes to keep things fresh. The biggest ship looks kind of like the Titanic, which I think is kind of funny, and kind of makes me wish I'd added an iceberg attack. But it was far too late for that. The entire level being water started to get a bit boring, so I also spent some time building islands that could be unlocked with upgrades and would serve as extra ship spawn points. On the last day of the jam, I did a really quick and dirty passive balancing by just playing through a couple of times and seeing where I got stuck. Since it was so rushed, I definitely did a bad job with the balance. It's okay at the beginning, but the game quickly speeds up way too fast, and the whole game is done a little faster than I wanted. You also end up getting way too many souls, so you can just spam any of the attacks you want. This is a particular problem for the Maelstrom, but that's okay. The game still lets you experience all the different attacks I'd made, which were really the point of this game anyway, and maybe I'll go back and improve the balance at some point. In the end, the Game Jam only had 5 entries, but still, I won first place in the enjoyable and style categories, which is pretty neat. I lost overall because I was dead last in the creativity category, but I was fine with losing. The first overall game was a really cool puzzle platformer with a great concept, kind of a perfect jam game, and you should check it out. If you want to play Poseidon's Mercy, you can find it on itch.io using the links in the description. There's a web version, but if you have performance problems, then I suggest trying one of the downloadable versions instead. 3D Godot web builds are honestly pretty dodgy. If you like it, then definitely also check out my main game project, Get in the Hole, on Steam. It's a roguelike about pushing stuff into a hole, and has a lot of the same spirit of fun as I put into Poseidon's Mercy. Giving it a wishlist would mean a lot to me. Subscribe for more videos about my games, and I'll see you later. Bye!